Hello folks, welcome to my presentation about Dapr, Spring Boot and Quarkus. My name is Mauricio Salatino, I'm a software engineer for Diagrid, and I wanted to give you a quick intro about Dapr in the Java space, specifically with Spring Boot and Quarkus. As I mentioned before, I work for Diagrid. I have a blog post that I've been running for more than 15 years called salaboy.com. I'm also a Java champion since 2025, and I'm working also with CNCF working groups, and in this case the advisory group, and I'm performing kind of like a chair member at that group that is specifically about developer experience. I wrote a book titled Platform Engineering on Kubernetes, and I'm currently writing another book with my friend Thomas Vitale that is titled Developer Experience on Kubernetes, both for Manning. So if you're interested in this new one or the previous one, check the Manning site and for more details. I wanted to do a quick mention to Mateus Cruz, a friend from Brazil. He works for the Itaú Bank in Brazil, and that's his blog, and he's the main contributor and maintainer for the Dapr Quarkus extension. And I will be talking a little bit about that today, but if you have more questions, I would encourage you to get in touch with Mateus or reach out and we will just try to answer questions. We wrote a bunch of blog posts and a bunch of presentations about Dapr and Spring Boot specifically. We presented at Spring I/O and we created a couple of blog posts in our site, so you can check it out with that QR. And yeah, you will find kind of like more for Spring Boot, more for Java, plain Java, but most of this content goes in kind of like in the same direction. Tries to explain to the Java community, to the Spring Boot community and the Quarkus community how Dapr works and the benefits of using something like Dapr in these ecosystems. I also did a presentation with my friend Thomas Vitale at Spring I/O, where we kind of like describe the approach that we took to extend the Java SDK to support more Spring native use cases. And there is a lot of work in progress around this. We are still working on this after a year of this because we keep finding better ways to integrate Dapr with the Spring Boot ecosystem. And finally, I wanted to mention that I did a presentation with Lauren Bourdeau from Postman or the Microx project about testing this kind of distributed applications, because when you have applications that require sidecars and requires things to be installed in your Kubernetes cluster, testing this is complicated, and we actually created a bunch of integrations with Microx to test these distributed applications even outside of Kubernetes, so you should check that out. Something that I published recently about long-running durable agents and Spring AI using Dapr Workflows is something that I would recommend you if you are looking into agentic systems and durable executions. So check this article in this zone as well, using all Java, using all Spring, and it points to a repository where you can run the examples yourselves in your own IDE. So let's talk about the Spring Boot integration first, and you can find all the source code for the extensions here. And basically what we have done is we have divided into kind of like three phases, like Spring support for auto wiring, the objects that we will need to interact with Dapr Workflows and Dapr APIs, then the Spring Boot starters to simplify dependencies, dependency management, and the test container side of things to provide like a local development experience. So by adding 2 dependencies to your project, you will get full support for all these things that I've just mentioned: auto wiring, integrations, and then testing locally without the need of running your application inside of Kubernetes. We cover a bunch of Dapr APIs, and we have been focusing lately on the workflow experience, which is fundamental to get right if you want to enable Java and Spring Boot developers to go fast and create workflows pretty fast. You can see that by just adding these, dependencies, you will be able to auto-wire Dapr clients and Dapr workflow clients, and this will use the environment variables or the Spring properties to figure out where the sidecar is to automatically connect this client to the sidecar. You can do that for the Dapr client or the Dapr workflow client. Then, whenever you want to test your applications locally without the need of installing any other CLI, any other tool, you just do Spring Boot test run, and this will bootstrap the application using TestContainers and the Dapr integration there. We will look into more details about how do you configure this a little bit further in the line. How does it work? Whenever you start your Spring Boot application, TestContainers will bootstrap the Dapr sidecar and some Dapr control plane services and connect to any infrastructure that you want to connect from your Dapr components. Similarly, we have TestContainers and Quarkus integrations for the Quarkus Dapr Extension. So if you're using Quarkus, which is an alternative to Spring Boot coming from the Red Hat folks, you can use the Quarkus Dapr extension to provide a similar experience on the Quarkus framework. In Quarkus, you have a single dependency that you can add, and it has support for these building blocks, state management, PubSub, secrets, and workflows. And as I mentioned before, similarly to what we do in Spring with AutoWire, you can inject these clients. Again, it will use the environment, the properties from the application to define and to figure out where the Dapr sidecar is running so it can connect. In Quarkus, you use Quarkus Dev, it's a specific CLI for Quarkus to start the dev services which will bootstrap all the Dapr containers. Similarly to Spring Boot, whenever you start your application with Quarkus Dev, the sidecar and the Dapr control plane services will be bootstrapped. But in this presentation, I wanted to focus on the Dapr workflows for durable execution side of things, right? Like consuming Dapr APIs is one thing, creating workflows is a little bit different. When you are creating workflows, the idea here is that you can provide durable execution for multiple tasks that needs to be executed, and you have like full control and resiliency around how this execution happens, and to make sure that if something fails, you will keep retrying until things get done. What I'm showing here is some common patterns that you can build using these durable execution frameworks. For example, parallel tasks in a resilient way, right? Like instead of having a thread pool where you start multiple tasks in parallel, you delegate the execution and the orchestration of these tasks, in this case to Dapr Workflows. And Dapr Workflow will keep track of these task executions. In this case, these tasks will be executed in parallel. And if for some reason the application crashes, the durable execution framework, Dapr Workflows, will keep track of which tasks were completed, which weren't, and it will just re-execute the ones that needs to be executed to completion. In all of these kind of like tools, you have the idea of grouping things, and that's why we support also child workflows, which pretty much allows you to compose more complex workflows based on other workflow definitions that you can call from a workflow. And then consistent scheduling is all about like how do you make sure that you schedule a task for every Monday at 9 a.m. in the morning, so you can run that consistently with no delays. So you can provide this kind of like semantics there with timers, with scheduled tasks, and these kind of things. So instead of like keep talking about Dapr workflows, I wanted to create a simple Spring Boot application, create a workflow, and show you the basic steps that you need in order to get started with this. So let's do that. Okay, so in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new application from start.spring.io. This allows you to create just a template for the application. We will add web, and we will add actuator, right? Because we want to have health checks for the application. So we'll generate this. This generates a file, a zip file here in my downloads. You can see I already have a demo there, so I will just create demo 2. And then what I will do is I will open these with IntelliJ. So I've already created an application, but let's do this from scratch so we can look at how this works. Okay, so first of all, the things that we need to do is we need to add the Dapr dependencies that I showed you before. So Dapr version, we will use 1.16.0. And then we will create a new dependency, which is basically IO Dapr Spring, and then Dapr Spring Boot Starter, right? And we want to use this version that we just defined up there, Dapr version. There you go. Now the same thing we do for the test dependencies. As I mentioned before, this brings the TestContainers integration, and we need to mark this one as scope test, right? So the idea here is that we have now a test dependency that brings all the TestContainers integration for bootstrapping the application locally without the need of the cluster, and then the dependencies for all the auto wiring. So we have here a demo application. This is a normal Spring Boot application. What the first thing that we will do is we will create like demo REST controller, so we can create REST endpoints, and we will annotate this one with REST controller, and then we will create public string. Let's call it the start. So we just start workflows post mapping start. There you go. Right. And what we're going to do here is we are going to automatically auto wire the Dapr workflow client. Dapr Workflow Client, Dapr Workflow Client. Of course, it's not finding it because I just added the dependency, so I actually need to refresh. So the dependencies get downloaded into the project. Let me see. Reload all main projects. Let me see if we have saved this. Dapr Spring Boot test. Yeah. So yeah, so we need Dapr Workflow Client. Yep, import class, there you go. And now what we do is we use this method that it's called schedule new workflow. Schedule new workflow takes a workflow class, Spring simple workflow class, right? That we haven't defined yet. So we can go and define that. We create the simple workflow class. And first of all, before doing anything, I need to implement a workflow, right? And I also need to make it a Spring component, so it's Spring Bin, so it's managed by Spring, and we can auto-wire other things in here for integration purposes, for example. And then what we need to do is we need to implement a method. In this case is the the create method that basically allows us to define our workflow definition by doing that, right? So instead of just printing a hello world as this is defined, what we can do is with the context, we can call an activity, and you can see that you can call an activity by just passing the name. So instead of hello world, we will do workflow first activity class get name. So that's the name of the activity. And then we can just finish it. We can just not do anything, but that will execute the activity in an asynchronous mode. But we want to wait for this activity to finish before moving forward. Finally, we will do complete workflow completed, right? So that's kind of like the output of the workflow whenever it's finished. And you can see we don't have the first activity, so we will just need to go and create a new activity. So let's create an activity first, and this is going to implement a workflow activity. There you go. And I need to implement the methods here for run, right? Like that's pretty much what my activity will do. And I need to make sure that I mark this as a component as well, so a Spring can actually use this as a Spring bin. And in this case, let's do something super simple. It's like executing the first activity, like super simple, right? There you go. So we'll just print a line. Here is where you just call all the systems, place messages in a message queue, interact with the cloud service, call ChatGPT, whatever you want to do in your workflow, right? So this is a super simple workflow. Now everything compiles, and now we have a REST endpoint that basically will create new workflow instances that we can track. We can remove that as well. So now if I, for example, do nbn spring boot run, which is just going to start my Spring Boot application here, we will see that the application will start, right? So the application is starting, and if I open a new window here and do HTTP post 8080 start, right? What I get is a 500 error, right? Like something failed. And of course it failed because it doesn't have any Dapr instance running anywhere, right? And we need to sort that out. This code will work if you run the application inside Kubernetes and you have, Dapr installed there, and you annotate your deployment with the right annotation and has the sidecar. This will work. The problem here is that we're not running on Kubernetes and there is no Dapr instance running. So we need to fix that. And in order to fix that, we will use the test dependency that I mentioned at the beginning. And how we're going to do that, we are going to basically create a test profile, like a version of the same application. So we will start the same application, but with some test configurations for running local testing, right? Like integration testing locally, or for development purposes like this, like starting the application in your laptop and running it and then just interacting with Dapr Workflows. So in order to do that, we need to do two things. First of all, we need to create this specific version of the application that we will call test demo application, right? And I will copy these two classes. They are like two classes that I already created because I don't want to spend too much time typing, but we will look into this now. So I will copy these two classes. Let me delete this one from here. We don't need this. And I will paste this here, and we will look into WhatsApp here, right? So that's just a simple test here that we can implement as well. But you will see that this test demo application is a Spring Boot application, It's a normal Spring Boot application, but it's actually loading some configurations coming from test containers and also exposing the application back to containers, so containers can call the application back, like in a bidirectional way. And where all the magic happens is in this very, very small class that basically is in charge of bootstrapping all the Dapr services that we need in order for application to work. So this creates a new instance of the Dapr container, which actually will start the Dapr sidecar plus, what I mentioned before, all the Dapr control plane services, connect everything together, and then make that container available for the application. This annotation here, service connection, is the one that basically will take all the details about where the sidecar is running and put it back and connect everything together to the Dapr workflow client that we are injecting here. So when we start our application and that Dapr container has been started, this Dapr workflow client would connect to that specific instance that is using random ports for testing purposes. So now there is a big difference, and I'm missing something that we need to do here at the Dapr application is to use this annotation, enable Dapr Workflows, right? This basically will allow us to, why it's not finding it out? Is it the Maven dependencies? Yeah, I think that this is it. Let's do this. Tools, build, rebuild project. It's just the ID. Yep. Enable Dapr Workflows. There you go. Come on, it's there. There you go. So now I am basically telling the Spring Boot application that there might be some workflows included, like the ones that we created, and that basically it needs to register them with Dapr Workflows whenever the application is starting. So finally, what we can do now, instead of doing MVN Spring Boot run, we need to do test run. So it uses the test configuration to start the application. And we can test now if the endpoint works. So let's check that out. You can see now that TestContainers is starting a bunch of containers like the Dapr sidecar and a bunch of other things. And also it's registering the workflows and the activities that I've created inside my application there, right? You can check the containers here. You see the Dapr sidecar was started, the scheduler and the placement were also started, and everything is wired together for it to work. Right, so now if I open the window just to send a request, I can send the same request that I've sent before. And now I got the workflow instance that it's actually executing the first activity and then completing. Right? So that's the most simple workflow that we can write. We can of course extend now the workflow definition and iterate over this by adding more call activities or even waiting for external events. And then basically keep building the application and writing, tests. Here in this case, we will be adding more tests into, the Spring Boot tests by just calling the application APIs and validating that the workflows have been executed. So let's do that. Let's extend the workflow, the very simple workflow that we have, to maybe let's do another call activity, right? Maybe we can just want to call another, like a second activity that we need to define, right? And we can just keep things simple. So just copy the first activity that we had. We will paste it and call it second activity. Executing the second activity. Again, here is where you implement your system integrations, calling other things, running some logic, checking a database, whatever you want to do here, using all the other Spring Boot beans that you might have in your application already. But this would be too simple. So let's add kind of like some logic here. And in order to add some logic, we will introduce the use of context wait for external event. So let's call it external event, and this return type of string, right? And we will wait as well for this. We will not want to continue the workflow until we wait for this. So the idea here is that now an external application can send a new event, and whenever we get that event in the workflow, we will move forward. In order to do that, we can also use the payload of the event, event data, to control the flow of the execution. So we can do something like if event equals call to, we actually want to call the second activity. If not, we will not call it, right? But also we want to, for example, do some logging here. So we can do get logger, info, waiting for external event. There you go. So now the idea is I start the workflow, execute the first activity, Then I wait for an external event. In this case, the event will be type of string. It can be any object that we want. And if we get the event, then we will actually evaluate the event payload. And if it's call to, the string call to, we will execute the second call activity. The idea here is, again, just to have some sort of like demonstrating flow control inside your workflows and creating different patterns. In this case, waiting for external events can be easily implemented with a single line. So now, in order to expose this, because now we will need to let the user emit an event so we can continue our workflow, we need to extend the controller here. So public void event, we'll call it simply event. And what we can do here is post mapping event, but more than event, what we want to do here is we want to do workflow ID. We need to specify which workflow ID we want to send the event to. And then what we can do here is we can do path variable string workflow ID, string event, right? So we can do Dapr workflow client, raise event, we can do workflow ID, external event, and event. There you go. So the idea here again is we enable the user to send an event for a specific workflow ID, and whenever that event gets raised, the workflow will continue, evaluate the event string in this case, and then define if it needs to call or not the second activity. We can quickly test this. Now we can stop this and we can just execute some request against it and against the new version of the application and the workflow. So let's do that. We will send the same request that we sent before to start the workflow. But now that the first activity is being executed, now we're waiting for an external event. That's good. And the external event will be waiting in this workflow ID. And the name of the event in this case, we will just use call to, so it actually goes into the if statement. So we call it, we get 200, that's everything is working, and you can see after waiting for the external event, we executed the second activity because the event was called to. We can do the same now, just start with a different instance. We have another workflow execution, but now instead of call to, we'll just leave it at call. We need to replace the instance ID here for the one that we just created. And you will see that it's waiting for the external event, but then it finished without, executing the second activity. So simple workflows. And finally, I wanted to say that again, now you have, because this is all integrated with Spring and also Dapr has been started as part of the Spring test context, you can start writing integration testing that basically call these APIs and validate where the workflow is at all times. So let's stop this just to run a final demo. But I wanted to go back to the presentation because I wanted to mention that all this that I've showed is fully integrated with our managed service that is called Diagrid Catalyst. And I wanted to show how easy it is just to run the same application, the same workflow that we just ran, against the managed offering that we have. So if you check Diagrid Catalyst, will give you visualization on your workflows, and we can see this by just running a single command that is here. I will just copy this command from this ID to the application that we were just creating, that's demo 2. So as I showed you before, when you run the applications with normal NVN Spring Boot run, this doesn't start Dapr because we are not using the test configuration, right? But that's the way that you will run your application inside Kubernetes. Now, if you want to run against Catalyst Managed Service, what you do is the following. You download the Diagrid CLI and then just run a command like this. In this case, saying that I have a project that is called Spring Boot, I have an application that's called Demo, and I want to start my application. So now the Dapr clients and the Dapr workflow clients will be automatically taking, the environment variables to connect to the remote environment. So you see, I'm not starting any containers, I'm just connecting to a remote environment. So executing this command will allow me to connect to a remote environment. Now it's going to start the app here with all the environment variables required to connect to that remote environment. And what we can do here is we can actually start a new workflow instance against the remote environment. You see, this new workflow instance was started, and what we can do now is we can check into our workflow UI here that allows us to see where workflows are in their execution. You can see we have a simple workflow running, and this workflow is waiting after executing the first activity. Now it's waiting for an event, so we need to copy this and do the same request that we did before with this one. You will see if I use call, that will not execute the second activity, and we should be able to see that the workflow finishes after receiving the external event. All right, so we got an issue there. Let me see what the issue is. Failed precondition. Okay, so let's execute this again. All right, so just an issue with my internet connection. Let's see if this finished. Yeah, so that finished. Perfect. Now let's do the other scenario where we just execute with the second activity as well, right? So we start the new workflow instance. That workflow instance is running. Now we'll use call2 to execute the second activity now. All right, so let's do that with the ID, have call2, but before let's check that we have a workflow running here, and it's waiting after the first activity for an event. So let's call the APIs, and we can also check here the logs coming from the server, in this case, that now executed the second activity. Right. Okay, perfect. So external event, second activity. Right, great. Okay, and that's pretty much showing how easy it is just to run against a different Dapr, execution server. In this case, Catalyst is supporting us that our application with this managed service. With that, I wanted to thank you for listening, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what's coming next, because what I've shown you is the Spring Boot side of things. In Quarkus, we have the same experience, but we are trying to align these two things in the same way, trying to align the release processes of these two extensions, because we believe that if we keep the extensions aligned, we will provide better user experiences. As I show you in the DSON article, I've been working with Spring AI and trying to integrate better just to provide workflow capabilities to these projects using LLMs. And for that, we want to also integrate the Dapr Conversation API to Spring Boot, so you can actually use the Dapr Conversation API as an abstraction to talk to LLM models. Finally, we are also looking into LangChain4j, because we believe that LangChain4j is a good alternative in the Quarkus ecosystem that we need to tackle. So we will start building some use cases for LangChain4j and the Quarkus support. Also bringing the Conversation API to Quarkus, and we were looking into support for Spring gRPC into Dapr to interact with gRPC services as well. That's supported already in Dapr, but we need to add the Spring layer on top of it. So thank you so much. We are always looking for contributors for the SDKs. So if you are a Java developer and want to contribute, feel free to reach out to me, Matheus, or anything in the open source team. They will guide you to the right place to start contributing. Thank you so much.